So, welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. Today, Stephen and I are going to talk about or ask the question or attempt to answer the question, is it possible to quiet the mind? And this came up when I was reading a meditation instruction article on Medium and by a meditation teacher. And this meditation teacher said, well, don't worry about quieting the mind because it's not possible. And so that was really, to me, that was surprising coming from a meditation teacher. And their point of view was that meditation is basically a mindfulness meditation, right? So you're just observing the workings of the mind. You're observing the content of the mind. And that's meditation according to that teacher. And so that is certainly an important aspect of meditation is mindfulness, is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, and observing whatever arises. That is a foundation of meditation. And it's possible to go beyond that. There's much more to meditation than just that. And after I read that article, it reminded me of back in graduate school. I was a philosophy major in graduate school. And I was graduate assistant for an amazing professor of Martin Heidegger scholar, Dr. Jack Caputo. And he took me to a conference where the lead speaker was a French philosopher in the deconstruction school named Jacques Derrida. And Jacques Derrida is certainly a very sophisticated, intellectually brilliant philosopher in the deconstruction school. And to give a very oversimplified view of deconstruction says that every position that someone tries to hold harbors within it that which will undo it. So whatever position you have, you are suppressing something else or a whole bunch of something else. And so in deconstruction, what the move that is made is to kind of uncover that which has been suppressed and to show how it just dissolves the position that you're trying to take. So I was at breakfast with Jacques Derrida and Dr. Jack Caputo, and I had the privilege of sitting right next to Jacques Derrida. And he was going on and on about how we are always already caught up in the constructions of the mind. We are always embedded in our language. And there's no way out of that. That is consciousness. Consciousness is generated within the matrix of language and the constructions of the mind. And so we can play with that to release the tensions of those constructions, but there is no way beyond that. And I very innocently at how old, 24 years old, said to him, well, I meditate. And what about in silence? In silence, there's a consciousness and awareness that is self-evident, that is quiet, that is still, that is silent. And he said, oh, that's not possible. Very interesting, I thought, because he now took a position, right? And he suppressed the possibility of silence. It's like, that's his whole thing, is to show how every position that you hold is suppressing something else and saying that's not possible. And here he is doing that very thing that he is so famous for undoing in everybody's arguments. So that was pretty much the end of him talking to me. He also kind of turned away from me, engaged with all the other people who were on to listening to him talk about how we're always embedded in language. So Jacques Derrida, French philosopher, but brilliant, little blind spot there, as we all have our blind spots for our positions, and very much in the tradition of French philosophy, going back to René Descartes, who sat quietly in a room, meditating on his mind, and he arrived at the fundamental truth that I think, therefore I am. So he identified who he is as a being, as a thinking being. He identified with his thinking. Again, identified with language, with the inner narrative, with, and I think that really carries through, certainly through Western culture, is that we're really identified with our narrative self, with our thinking mind. And we don't recognize any possibility of going beyond that. Is when we sit quietly and we're here in meditation, thoughts come up, thoughts, feelings, right? They seem to be persistent. And it seems that, at least at the beginning of meditation, that it's possible that that's just what the mind does and there's no going beyond that. So what we want to talk about today is there is not only a possibility, but a definite skillful means, or there are definite skillful means for transcending the narrative self, for transcending the thinking mind and finding a deep sense of quiet and stillness of the mind. So, Stephen, I know you have a client experience that you'd like to share with guiding someone in that direction, and then we'll go from there into some real simple, straightforward guidance into how you can approach quieting the mind.
Kevin, thank you, and love and blessings to everybody. Kevin, your example was so beautiful and poignant. That answer, and that it's not possible. That you reminded me for a moment of a study I was doing with a Harvard scholar, Ron Richard, and we were in a big symposium conference, and everybody was talking about languages and the language of thought, and he was speaking about a theory of various cultural forces that exist, and that each of them has languages that we're often not aware of. Things like, so they have these cultural forces like routines, expectations, opportunities, time, modeling, language, environment, and interaction. So he was saying, time has a language that we use when we interact with people. There's a whole language of time that we use. And then equally, there's a language of relating. When we're relating to another person, we speak in particular way, we use particular pronoun, and so on and so forth. And so he was moving people from, this I, which is separate, into the we language, which is much more universal and based on interbeing. So which was a very good point of view, and a very, opening perspective for everybody there. And so they'd been talking about all these different languages and how to, manipulate it. So I stood up and I said, this was before I knew you, and said exactly the same thing. I said, what about the language of silence? And there was this, there was a deafening silence for a few moments. And he said, he was so gracious, he said, asked me my name, and I said, and he said, you've got a point. He said, there is a whole area of research that actually has an undefined language, the language of silence. And he said, we don't pay attention to it. We pay attention to all the other forms. And he just said, you're right. Because he said, in my forces, I haven't actually identified the language of silence as being a possibility. So he said, wow, he said, there's a whole field of research there that I have. And he was so gracious about it. It was really beautiful. And again, it pointed to the fact that in the intellectual circles of that silence, that possibility for the mind to be quiet, because I said the same thing. because I said in the language of silence, you actually move beyond concepts. I said everything that you're speaking about here is actually conceptual form, and the opportunity to go beyond concept, which is a whole, other language of non-concept, and that access point is silence or stillness or spaciousness. And so, he was very gracious, very open to the fact that that was not mentioned anywhere in the research. There was very little research, in fact, done on it by any Harvard scholar. And so it was really lovely. It was just one of those points.
So he didn't just shut you down.
He did not just shut me down. No, he was really good. He said, he said you could actually make a whole career on that, because he said it's so, it's so unthought about. And everybody laughed because he was speaking to the fact that it's not of thought in that sense.
It's beyond the mind.
Exactly. So I thought I'd give some examples, Kevin, of some clients in the way that I've worked with them, because I think they speak right to the heart of, is it possible to quiet the mind? So a typical one would be that when somebody comes to me, with a headache, a real bad headache. And of course, when you are in that kind of situation where, especially physical, I think for those of you that are listening, if you have physical ailments of one thing or another, the physical body can sometimes take over things, and it feels like the only thing you've got is a headache. And you might find it very difficult to be aware of that, because in fact the pain can be, so in this case, and in the many people that I've seen for healing over the years, it was a headache that had stuck around for a week or more. So this particular person, and in fact a number of people that had seen me recently, were suffering from all sorts of things: brain fog, fatigue, headaches, and so on. So the first thing I asked them to do is very simply to bring awareness to it, because generally speaking, you're aware. A fundamental, a foundation of awareness itself is that you're aware of whatever you're experiencing. So when people have a thought, and we've did this on a previous podcast, if you think about your breakfast right now, if you're having a thought, generally you're aware of it, right? You can bring up the thought of a lovely breakfast that you had, and you're aware of it. So in the same way, you can be aware of your headache. Now, it's a little more difficult sometimes than a thought, because the headache can be pounding, and it might have been pounding for days. And you can actually be aware of it. So for example, if you're listening to Kevin and I right now, you're actually hearing, you're actually aware of my voice right now, in the same way as you might be aware of a headache, or you might be aware of a thought. So when you have a headache, the subtle awareness is a sensation, right? You've got this sensation in your head of this pounding thing that you want to rush off and take Tylenol for, but in fact you can spend some moments just simply being aware of the sensation. And in the same way, as you're looking, or if you don't look at me in the screen, if you're perceiving objects in your room, you're also aware of the objects in your room. So that's the first thing I always do with clients, is help them to be aware very simply of whatever's present. If they've got a difficult thought, a stressful moment that they're dealing with, a stressful event, I'll help them to become aware of the thought of the event, or the feeling of the event. If they've got a headache, I'll help them to be aware of the headache, and I'll help them to be aware that, in fact, in this way, you're actually being aware, and that awareness itself accompanies every experience. Now, this can be quite an aha for people, right? I mean, we both know this, that if you're aware of your thought and then you come back to the headache, you're still aware, right? And for a moment, you might have forgotten about the headache. So there's another aha, and that's often what I do next, is I ask the person, if they're aware of the headache, where is the sensation? So if you've got an ailment right now, while you're listening to me, I would ask you just simply to be aware of the sensation and notice where it is in the body, right? Because then you're bringing awareness to that sensation and where it exists in your body. And you notice that you're aware. Now, a headache's a great example. So let's say you're aware of the sensation of pounding in your head. So then what I get people to do next, Kevin, is to then bring their awareness to a different part of their body. So once we know that the person has really got this strong sensation pounding in their head and that they're aware of it, then I ask them to put their hand on their heart. Now, this seems such a simple thing to do, but we often forget that in order to, just like the headache draws your attention to the pounding in your head, a hand on your heart, and this is why it feels so good, right? When you rub your heart, a hand on your heart can actually bring your attention, and therefore you'll become aware, right, of the sensation in your heart. So right now I'm putting it on my heart. If you put your hand on your heart, there's a warmth in your heart. So you're now aware of the sensation in your heart. And what's common to both, right? If you put your hand back on your head, you're aware of the sensation in your head. And now you're aware of the sensation in your heart. What's the thing that's common? Awareness.
Sensory awareness.
Sensory awareness. Exactly. Kevin, it seems so extraordinarily simple, right? That there's one thing that accompanies all experience. Now, so the moment that I've got a client aware of that, and they suddenly, there's a subtle shift that's happening. They might not be aware of that subtle shift, but they're actually aware that there's one thing. Oh, right. I'm aware of my headache. I'm also aware when I go down to my heart that the heart, that this awareness, being aware or awareness itself is accompanying every single experience I have. Now, so that very subtle shift starts to become an aha, because you then being aware or awareness itself, this just simple movement from headache to heart, you're not only using your what seeming restrictions or obstacles to self-liberate, but you're actually opening to the possibility that awareness itself is the common element in all experience. So when that happens, you start to, something opens up for you, because you become aware that everything we know and aware of changes. So that's the other thing. I get them then to go back from the heart to the headache and notice, was there a moment then you weren't actually aware of the sensation of the headache? Or has it even shifted? And oftentimes what's happened, merely from that movement down and back, there's been a subtle shift. And they might go, oh, I kind of didn't notice it quite so strong. And I said, right. So everything that we know or are aware of changes, even your headache. And then what I get people to do is, especially if it's a headache, because I used to be very good, Kevin, at releasing people's headaches, even when I was a little kid. I could just put my hands on people, feel where the energy was blocked and release it. And I've been able to do that for such a long time. I remember I had a good singer friend. She was a real diva, a professional singer. And one day she came to me. We were having to do concerts and gigs. I used to play, and she was the main vocalist. And was before something we were going to do. And she said, oh, I've got this terrible migraine. And she said, I've never been able to get rid of them. I said, well, how would you like it if it could actually go in, a couple of minutes? She said, she laughed. She said, I'd say it's impossible. So I did much the same thing as what I'm doing here. And then I gently put my hands over her head. It's like working with Reiki, but it's something I just did as a kid that I've done intuitively. And I touched different points on her head. So what I've suggested to people, if you're trying to look for headache remedies, is you put your head, you put your hands either side of this suture that runs down the center of your skull, of your cranium, and you pull it apart. So you actually pull that apart, first of all, because that actually releases some pressure in the head. And you start to work on those acupressure points. You start to work on here, the points in your temples, here, the point at the third eye, here, drain the sinuses, here, put your thumbs in the ears right here, and then hold it, push it in, and pull them out so that it actually pops, because quite often there's pressure in the eustachian tube that you drain all these glands and energies in neck, and then especially shoulders and neck. So just simple things like that, because what that also is doing is, again, you're actually shifting this sensation, and you're aware of shifting sensation. So you start to really tune into the nature of impermanence itself, and that is that everything we know changes, and yet knowing or being aware actually is the same. So you're still aware. You're aware of here, you're aware of here, you're aware of here, you're aware of here, you're aware of here. And this is a real aha. It's such a simple way of pointing to awareness itself. And then you start to understand that no other element throughout experience is continuous. So I can ask you to bring up your thought. So then when I went to these various clients and said, okay, where's your headache now? And their headache had gone. I actually, in some cases, I'll use, depending on how I feel with the person, sometimes I'll use tuning forks to work with, because this does something useful as well. The tuning forks actually bring not only a vibration or resonance that again shifts attention, but also it can open people can sense, oh, I'm suddenly aware of something else outside of the headache sensation. They're so simple, right? They're such simple tools, because then you start to recognize that, oh, right, I've got a headache, but it's been disappearing, it's been changing, so I'm aware. Same with thoughts and feelings. That thoughts come up. Your thought of the breakfast that I asked you about just before, it's not there now, right? So it's been changing. It's so this sense of impermanence and openness to the shifting of thoughts and feelings and perceptions underlying all of that. What remains present throughout all of that is awareness, and awareness doesn't change. Awareness
right.
is
You start to know something or be in touch with something that's beyond the mind.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And I noticed two things you were doing there. That just connecting people with awareness of all these things, and two, really focusing on attention to sensory signals like tuning forks, you're listening, right? Pressure, or feeling an inner sensation, or just directing attention to a sensation. So both, when we activate sensory awareness, that is a different part of the brain than, in the center of the brain versus the thinking part of the mind. And as we attend to a sensation and put all our focus there, the thinking mind fades to the background, right? Because we've put all our resources somewhere else, right? Exactly. Into sensation. And so that's a powerful way to quiet the mind, which is what we, all the cues we initiate a meditation session with, right? With feeling the feet on the ground, feeling the sensations of the hands and softening them, right? Awakening that sensory awareness. And then the second thing you did was connecting people to that which is beyond the sensations, beyond the changing, is that continuous awareness that is always present in the background, right? We just aren't recognizing it, right? And totally. That space is beyond thought. There's no thought happening, right? If we are just tuning into awareness itself beyond the content of the mind. We can observe the mind from there, and we know, because we can observe the mind and the thoughts and the sensations, we know we are not them. We are the one who is aware.
Yeah. When you were sharing that, Kevin, about awareness that's always present in the background, and I've been very aware when I'm studying with the various lamas or various teachers that an instruction many of these wonderful masters give that you basically did then was rest back, right? So to drop, to sink, because quite often, just as you've said, and a headache's a good example, again, going back to when we've got the headache, we've got lots of thoughts going, we've got lots of things happening in our head. We haven't often even considered that it might be possible to live somewhere else in the body, that it might be possible to drop into the heart. That's why placing your hand on the heart, you kind of naturally, instead of your eyes going up here, you naturally, for a moment, you drop and you sink here. And then, as you said, resting back. If you actually literally do that, they're really helpful, simple cues to you resting as awareness itself. Resting, so drop, sink, rest back, relax. They're so simple.
I immediately realized there's more than the thinking mind, right?
Exactly. There's suddenly this felt sense of awareness itself. You're aware of awareness itself. That is a whole, you know, for the most part, we're so fascinated by our, thoughts and feelings and sensations and perceptions. We're so fascinated by them that we kind of go after them. We seldom, if ever, notice the experience simply of being aware. And when you drop, sink, rest back, and relax, you suddenly feel awareness of awareness itself. You're suddenly feeling into that awareness. You can go through the whole of your life without ever becoming aware of the knowing of all that is, which simply requires you to be aware of these thoughts, and they're not you, and the feelings, and they're not you, and the perceptions, and they're not you, and the senses, and they're not you. And so, it's like, that's why the genuine inquiry into who am I, because we often make that kind of connection. Oh, I'm hungry, or I'm I know what I'm thinking. I'm aware of my thoughts and sensations, or I'm feeling this, or I'm thinking that. We often talk about that, but we rarely turn back towards the one that is aware.
Is aware of that, right? We're simply identified with that content. And I thought the one other, so if we have awakening sensory awareness, right, directing our attention to sensory, to sensations, right, and then becoming aware of the one who is aware of that. Those are two simple techniques. And then just sensing kind of the formless qualities that are present in awareness when we're not focused on content. So feeling the stillness underneath all movement. So if you just be very still, and just for a moment, focus down into your feet and down into the earth, and feel the stillness of the earth. And you feel the stillness underneath all movement. Mind is quiet. And then in that stillness, listen to the silence underneath all sounds. Listen to the silence underneath all sounds. Mind is quiet. And sense the boundless space of awareness itself. Open, vast, clear, spacious. Mind is quiet. Even for a moment. Now opening your eyes if you've had them closed, and maintain that sense of awareness of the space around you and inside you is one space of awareness, one space within which all these sensations, all these thoughts, all these feelings arise within this vastness of awareness that is still silent and spacious, and even beyond those qualities. Mind is quiet. Ah, what a relief.
It is indeed. Kevin, you reminded me of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. As you're listening to this with your quiet mind, he always says, be aware of the stillness. As you said, what lies beyond, the stillness and silence and spaciousness. It is that access point. It is. And it really, you start, as you, going back to your talk with the professor, in complete contrariness to the professor, you start to get curious about what lies beyond, what lies in the quietness of the mind. You start to become very curious about the knower of all experience, or being aware of awareness itself. So when you've got this gentle, quiet mind that allows everything to arise within it, sometimes there are no thoughts, and sometimes a thought might arise within the serenity and the tranquility of the mind itself.
And you are not the mind.
Exactly. You start to see straight into the heart of all experience, awareness of awareness itself.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you too, Kevin. That was beautiful.
And thank you all for watching and for listening. Thank you for your practice, for engaging with us here. And if you'd like to learn more about these practices of meditation, awareness, subtle energy meditation, including the ROV meditation app and our Raising Our Vibration community of practice, we'd love to have you visit us at raisingourvibration.net. Until next time, enjoy your practice.